Welcome to our final panel for this year's Indo-Pacific Business Forum. I am Jason Chung, and I am the U.S. Ambassador to the Asian Development Bank. I am moderating this panel on opportunities the Asian Development Bank is driving across the Pacific Island countries and how ADB is evolving its procurement policies to address challenges that companies must contend with while working in such unique environments. I'm joined today by ADB in-house expertise and U.S. government officials who work on policy and procurement issues. Some housekeeping. We may have some bandwidth issues, so I beg for your indulgence and I appreciate your patience. We'll have time at the end for some Q&A, so please use the chat feature built into the Hive system to ask your questions throughout our three presentations. Once all our panelists have finished their remarks, a colleague would feed me questions to allow me to facilitate this conversation. Before I introduce our speakers, I want to provide context and emphasize as to what ADB does in the region. On average, ADB invests over $30 billion annually across the Indo-Pacific. ADB funding often serves as a catalyst for additional bilateral and multilateral funding arrangements. 2019 proved to be a banner year with a total ADB procurement of U.S. goods and services reaching $545 million, an increase of nearly 100% over 2018 total figures of $272.9 million. Of those totals, U.S. goods increased by 109% from $243.44 million in 2018 to $507.57 million in 2019, while consulting services increased by almost 30%. As the U.S. and the rest of the world is returning to a new normal, I want to assure you that the U.S. government agencies sponsoring these webinars will continue to push our interests across this region by increasing the numbers of small and medium-sized exporters of goods and services involved in ADB's work. With that, it's my distinct privilege to introduce our panelists. We have Paul Curry. Paul is ADB's Principal Operations Coordination Specialist for the Pacific Islands. Paul has a long history working with ADB, including a stint in my previous role as alternate U.S. Executive Director, and he's a close personal friend of mine. And in a way, this job was made easier with Paul being here. Paul will be helping us understand the priority investments in the Pacific Island countries, along with the scope and diversity of ADB's efforts across the region. Also with us is Rustam Abdukaumov, who is Director of Procurement Division 2, which includes the Pacific operations at ADB. He will help us understand some of the challenges ADB faces in supporting the region and how ADB is evolving to resolve them. Rustam himself also hails from Central Asia, which is the other of the two ADB regions expected to see significant increases in ADB funding over the next few years. Lastly, we have Mark O'Grady, who serves as a Senior Commercial Officer assigned to the ADB. Mark previously served in similar roles at the U.S. Department of Energy and Transportation, as well as having served in U.S. embassies in Riyadh, Seoul, and Moscow. He has worked for the Department of Commerce domestically in Denver and Minneapolis as well. Mark, with his deep knowledge and expertise, will provide a perspective on how the U.S. government is evolving to help small and medium-sized firms work with ADB. After this session, I encourage you to engage Mark and his colleague Michael Mia should you want your firm to have some individual attention. Mike is also monitoring the chat function as well and will provide me some questions from the audience to ask at the end of the presentations. With that, I turn it over to Paul to get us started, then Rustam, and our final presenter will be Mark. Paul, please.
Thank you very much, Jason. I hope everyone is seeing my page at the moment, my PowerPoint presentation. I'm going to provide a brief overview of ADB's operations in the Pacific. As Jason alluded to, it is one of 5 regional departments in ADB. And historically, in comparison to our Asian counterparts, the volume of work in the Pacific has not been as large as, for example, our work in China or in India, as you might expect. However, the Pacific does represent a region of the bank where we're seeing extraordinary growth. And you can see from this first table that our portfolio of work in the Pacific is essentially doubling every 5 years. A very low level of less than half $500 million in 2005 to projected amount of almost $4.5 billion in 2022. So a very significant area of growth for the bank. I don't think anywhere else, any other region is growing as quickly as this. Of course, in part, that's from a low base. And then if you look at the portfolio of work, both by country and by sector, what you would expect is that PNG is the largest country. And so you see that about half of our work is in Papua New Guinea, and then followed by Fiji, and then some of the other smaller countries. So we have 14 countries in total in the Pacific department that we deal with. Again, the largest being PNG, the smallest being Niue, who is also the most recent newly joined member of ADB. By sector, if you look at the various sectors that we're involved in, the big four sectors really are transport, water, urban infrastructure services, public sector management, and energy. We also, of course, have significant work in ICT and health and education, in ANR, agriculture and natural resources. But you can see from the chart here that transport is the bulk of that, and that's typically a lot of port work and land transportation. And so let me just go on to the next slide. You can see that the countries are, the populations here are quite small, again, by comparison to our Asian counterparts. The largest PNG has less than 10 million, and the smallest Niue, has 1,700. Hard to believe it's a country, but it is. And so, this smallness of size presents a lot of challenges. They often don't have a lot of domestic capacity, either human capacity, commercial capacity, financial capacity, and that means that development partners like ADB or bilaterals like USAID or others have to do a lot of hand-holding and design our projects in different ways than we would design them in Asian clients or Asian countries. So part of it is about the size, but you can again see the per capita GDP, the GDP in general, and then the per capita GDP. I should mention that the top two countries, Niue and Cook Islands, although both very small, have a special relationship with New Zealand. And so citizens of those countries actually carry Kiwi passports and are able to move freely between New Zealand and their home countries. And so that results in some large part, I should say, for the very high GDP per capita. Also at the top of the list there, Palau, which also has a special relationship with the United States under the Compact of Free Association, has a significant tourism industry. So that accounts centered around diving primarily, scuba diving primarily. Oftentimes these per capita GDPs are a little misinforming because it looks like in some cases that the countries are fairly well off, but yet their infrastructure needs are quite high. A lot of that is driven by the low population, right? So you take any kind of economy and divide it by a small number, and it looks wealthy. I'll say a brief word about COVID-19 and the impact on these Pacific Island countries. Obviously, these countries are very isolated. Under normal circumstances, some of the most isolated countries in the world. With COVID, even more isolated. And this is having a significant effect on visitor arrivals, on the economies in general. Particularly the tourism-based economies are obviously not seeing anything. I mentioned Palau earlier. Their economy is shrinking dramatically as you see a drop in visitor arrivals. Other countries are able to operate normally domestically. So Fiji's not seeing the tourists that they would normally see, but they're operating relatively normally. So COVID is having a large economic impact on the countries. But so far, the outbreak of actual COVID cases from a health point of view have been relatively limited. Handfuls, I should say, with the exception of PNG, which is seeing a larger outbreak, but in most of the smaller countries, there's handfuls or dozens of COVID outbreaks, and you haven't seen the community transfer, community infection that you're seeing in mainland countries. I'll just mention briefly, we talk about this more in the Q&A if people are interested. What that means in the short term for ADB's engagement in these countries is that we're likely to provide budget support and public financial management support in the short term, rather than new infrastructure investments will be on hold probably for a year or so, or maybe another 6 or 8 months. That means that ongoing infrastructure projects continue to be implemented, but new infrastructure projects will probably be a little delayed. We're still projecting significant infrastructure investments in these countries, but there probably be a little delay. But still lots of work to be done around engineering, detailed engineering design, feasibility studies, and planning well in advance of actual implementation of the project. So still a lot of opportunities here. I'll just mention briefly in closing that we do have offices in almost all 14 countries. We don't have one in Niue, given the very small population and the fact that it's the most recent member. But elsewhere, we have staff on the ground. Of course, most of us are clustered in the major hubs of Manila, Sydney, Port Moresby for PNG, and in Suva for Fiji. But we do have staff on the ground in each of these countries who are very quite available to work with you if you have questions about the country context or commercial opportunities, or what ADB is doing. So maybe I'll stop there and I'll stand by for questions when everyone else is done. Thank you.
Paul. Rustam, if you please.
Thank you, Ambassador Chung, and it's my pleasure to be here and try to discuss a little bit and share information about procurement challenges. And let me share my screen with you. I hope you see it now, right? So on the first slide, I just wanted to present you some information about contracts awarded to consulting firms from the US during the last 3 years. Of course, there are many different types of contract, but I just wanted to focus on consulting services because I think US firms are quite active in the Pacific region. And here you can also see, if we compare the total volume of the portfolio of ADB in different regions in the Pacific, operations are just representing 2.7% of ADBs in total. But if you look at the consulting services, the picture is much better, much greater. In the Pacific, so just last 3 years, about 8 million in contracts in consulting services, and other regions, it's about 80 million. So it's close to, say, 10%. So that shows that the consulting firms are quite active, and we see that in many projects. But first, before going to discussing some challenges, I would like to show you this information. This shows partly some information that Paul already shared. But for us, from procurement point of view, what we can see here, it's only maybe 3 countries are relatively large in terms of population and economy. This is PNG, Solomon Island, and Fiji. And other countries are really very small. They're very small, they have very small population, they have very small capacity, and this is one of the challenges. Of course, we are trying to prepare more projects because we are all interested in providing support to these countries, but you would understand that the size of portfolio in those small countries will be, of course, much, much smaller compared to bigger countries, and the opportunities will be, of course, limited. This map, it's very interesting, and I think it's very useful for all of us to understand the challenges which Pacific countries are facing in terms of their geographical location. So they're very remote from all big markets. They're very remote from US, they're very remote from Australia, from New Zealand. They're quite far away from Singapore and mainland Asia. And this is where from all consulting services and contractors come. So this is something which, of course, it's difficult to change because we have to live in that environment. We still have to prepare projects, we have to do tenders, and ensure that there are enough contractors and consultants who are willing to work there. But sometimes it's not working well. So I just wanted to share with you some of the constraints from project implementation and procurement perspective, which we are facing, and we are basically trying to mitigate those risks. But in general, because of small population, the capacity of executing agencies is also not very strong. So in other countries, we may have executing agencies who are working with ADB for 20 years and they have done 20, 50 projects. So they have very strong capacity and they know how ADB operates. Whereas in the Pacific, the capacity of executing agencies is much, much more limited. Maybe in the PNG and in the Fiji, where we have relatively large portfolio, we are providing several loans to the same agencies. They are building their capacity. But still, for example, in terms of preparation of detailed design, the capacity is very low. And this is actually key to successful implementation of projects. In many countries where apart from outside of the Pacific region, usually detailed design is prepared by the government entities. Government finances that, and this is already ready. And only during project preparation, we have to focus on preparation of bidding documents. In case of Pacific countries, because of lack of domestic capacity, we will have to recruit consulting firms who will prepare detailed design, and then they help in preparation of bidding documents, they help in conducting tenders, they help in the bid evaluation, because EA is also not very familiar with ADB processes. And eventually, after contracts are awarded, foreign consulting firms are helping in construction supervision and in project implementation in general. So this is from a consulting perspective. But also, there is a very limited local capacity of contractors and suppliers. This is a very big challenge, especially in the Pacific, because see, in other regions, we always, when we design projects, we are trying to see or analyze the local capacity of contractors, up to what contract values they can implement contracts, and also see whether there is an interest from foreign contractors. And in the mainland, the main Asian countries, there's always competition. There are too many local contractors competing, and there are still foreign contractors interested. In the Pacific, the picture is a bit different, because only in few countries there are local contractors who can implement civil work contracts. Right? And at the same time, if we design projects having small packages, we still are not sure whether there will be enough contractors from that particular country who can implement contracts. But if we keep large contracts, we have to make sure that these are attractive for international contractors. And large, the term large is very relative. So for example, if it is a $10 million, $15 million civil work contract for road rehabilitation or construction or port upgrade, that may look huge for some of the small countries, because local capacity is only maybe up to 1 million, 2 million. But $15 million contract may not be very attractive for international contractors, because they still have to bring equipment from the overseas. And then this is a huge distance to transport it, install, and then after that contract is done, to take it back. So the mobilization costs and initial investment is very huge. So therefore, one of the challenges which we are facing during project preparation and considering procurement arrangement is to properly assess capacity of local contractors and also see whether there are enough foreign contractors who are interested. Another very specific issue in the Pacific when it comes to civil work contracts, which is not present in other parts of the region, is lack of basic construction materials. When we are going to build a road or a port or other facility, what we need the aggregate materials, crushed stone, we need steel, we need cement, we need fuel. And in some countries, even the crushed stone and sand is not locally available. It has to be shipped from some other places. That has a big impact on the supply chain for contractors. So therefore, even if there are local contractors who can implement contracts, they may not have access to those materials, which poses a risk during contract implementation. So we are trying to assess those kind of aspects in all countries where we operate. Because for foreign contractors, it makes sense to participate in this kind of tenders when they see a continuity. It's not a one-off exercise when they bid, they win one contract. They want to see a longer pipeline. They want to see kind of strategic involvement in certain markets where they would invest. They will establish the supply chain of different materials. But because of small sizes of projects and individual contracts, this is quite a big challenge. But what we are trying to do, we have probably, we're facing the same challenges as the World Bank, because the World Bank also has a similar and very strong involvement in the Pacific. We are coordinating with the World Bank. We are sharing information, learning from each other, what to do, and actually we agreed to the extent possible to combine our resources in designing projects so that we do not have the same one agency who has to implement two separate projects, one financed by ADB and one financed by the World Bank, because it's basically the executing agency will have to spend double of amount of time to do this work. So we are trying to coordinate with the World Bank so that if there are projects in the pipeline in the same sector, if we can combine our efforts and have one project co-financed rather than two separate projects, this would contribute to improving some efficiencies. And by the way, for all of you, ADB has signed an agreement with the World Bank, which is so-called Alternative Procurement Arrangement Agreement. This is a framework agreement between the two institutions. In the case of co-financing under one project, we would determine in advance who will be the lead co-financer. And then the rules and procedures related to procurement of that lead co-financer will apply. So it means one institution fully delegates procurement oversight to another institution. Currently, we have 4 projects jointly co-financed. Under one project, World Bank is lead, and under other 3 projects, ADB is lead. So we hope to improve efficiency in terms of project implementation by using this approach. Then, very specific to procurement operations and project implementation in general in the Pacific countries, we are using so-called one project, one consultant approach, which we are not using in any other countries, in any other regions. This means that we agree in advance that one consulting firm will be engaged to prepare a feasibility study for a project, to prepare a detailed design for all the infrastructure, and then eventually will monitor and supervise construction activities after contracts are awarded. This is to save time, because time for recruitment of consultants in the Pacific countries is a bit longer compared to other countries because of weak capacity. And in many cases, executing agencies are requesting ADB to do the selection. But we basically agreed that in cases where it is possible, we would advertise one big package where consulting firms who are interested to bid for it, they have to demonstrate their experience, not only in preparation of feasibility studies, doing economic analysis, financial analysis, but also they have to demonstrate that they have capacity and past experience in preparing detailed design for the infrastructure in question, whether it's seaports, or it's roads, or it's power plants, because we have also, I think, a few projects with the solar power. And they have to demonstrate that they have a team of good engineers who are familiar with the construction supervision. Those who are working with contractors, reviewing their invoices, verifying the work done. So that's something maybe which you can look at, because this is very unique approach. So by this, we are trying to increase the sizes of these consulting services contracts and make it more attractive for consulting industry. But because there will be one firm doing everything, we have to make sure that there is independent and a validation of all these activities. Because if there were the flaws in the detailed design, these may translate in the poor quality of infrastructure. And therefore, we are also introducing in this scheme so-called independent review consultants who will review at different stages the feasibility studies, they will review detailed design, and they will be also reviewing performance of consultants during project implementation, during construction supervision. This is to ensure that the quality of these services are at adequate level. And since procurement is a big challenge for all the executing agencies, we, in our procurement department, we have prepared a roster of 20 procurement consultants, very experienced consultants who have been working, many of them have been working in the Pacific countries, many of them are familiar with all those challenges. So we have so-called the framework agreement, where they can be engaged just in one day. We have already evaluated them, we have agreed on their rates. It's just a matter of confirming their availability, and the call-off can be issued just in one day, and the consultant could be basically mobilized immediately. So this is another kind of way to mitigate all these risks related to procurement. So I wanted to talk a little bit, it's just for your information, because there are a lot of questions about ADB's new procurement framework, what is working, what is not, what's different from our past approach. I just wanted to tell that one key element of our new procurement framework and new reforms is a strategic procurement planning. So we used to have a risk assessment, procurement risk assessment under the previous framework, which was basically focused on only capacity of executing agencies, just to check, do they have past experience or not in implementing projects. Now this risk assessment is more focused, it's multi-layer, and it actually focuses very importantly on the market assessment. So that before the project design is finalized, we have an understanding who are local contractors and consultants, who are foreign contractors and consultants, who can potentially bid. Another new element in that is that the procurement framework is that we are trying to focus more on quality, and we are introducing new methods of, for example, bid evaluation, which is not only the lowest cost, but it's a combined evaluation of technical and financial proposals. Similar to consulting services, but this is related to mostly we applied it in the civil work contracts, so-called the merit point evaluation system. So this is where we would like to see contractors explaining or presenting how they are going to implement this contract, take into account possible risks, how they're going to address the issue of shortage of materials, or basically shipping these materials from some other locations. So this is a new element. Another new element in our procurement framework, which we are trying to introduce, but the scope will be a bit limited. This is life cycle cost evaluation. Life cycle cost evaluation is usually used when the facility is which needs to be operated for X number of years, right? Where there is a one package where a contractor designs, builds, and operates one facility, right? For example, if it's just rehabilitation of the road, we would not use the life cycle cost because it's usually local organizations who are responsible for maintenance. But if it is, for example, water treatment plant or wastewater treatment plant or solar plant, it has to be operated. And in many cases in the Pacific countries, because these are new facilities, countries may not have capacity to. So this is where we introduce so-called DBO contracts, design, build, and operate contracts. And in the bidding documents, we specify that we will take into account the life cycle cost. If it is to be operated for 20 years, 30 years, we have to know what will be the cost of that. And that is a factor in the final ranking. So what I wanted to also emphasize, in the Pacific, we have to focus quite a lot on capacity building. So we do it continuously. We work together with our colleagues from PARC, from Pacific Department, because capacity needs to be improved in many fronts. It's in the project design, it's in the project implementation, in procurement, and also in the contract management. We want to make sure that there are no disputes between contractors and executing agencies, because executing agencies do not really have experience in managing those contracts. So we continuously provide this kind of training, and we will focus on that for years to come. And also what we are trying to introduce, and this is, I think, very relevant in this basically environment when we have a pandemic impact, this is the use of e-procurement system. Not all countries are using the e-procurement system, but we all know, because of very simple impact on the procurement. Normally, the bids are submitted in envelopes, by hand or by post. Because of COVID and travel restrictions, canceled flight, bids are announced, I mean the tenders are announced, but in many countries it's not possible to physically submit the bids, even there are no courier services to deliver them. So what we are trying to do is to introduce these e-procurement tools for executing agencies still to be able to receive bids during that pandemic. We have already purchased, ADB has purchased one electronic platform, which is called TenderLink, which is available free of charge to all executing agencies in ADB who are facing these problems. And we are also trying to introduce in the Pacific countries these e-procurement tools as a permanent solution, regardless of the COVID impact, just to improve transparency, to make it more efficient in terms of time, and to basically demonstrate that the countries can transform to more kind of a digital way of doing business. So I would probably stop on the procurement-related issues and wanted to inform you that today, just after a few hours, 4 p.m., ADB is going to have one big virtual event, which is Business Opportunities Outreach event. So some of you have been working with ADB before. You know that every year we used to conduct so-called Business Opportunities fairs. And these were always in Manila. And actually, there was very active participation from US companies. Every year we had quite a big delegation from US companies. This year, unfortunately, because of COVID, it's not possible to organize in person, but we are going to do it virtually. So we will have a very interesting panel from ADB experts, represented by ADB experts, and also external experts who will be discussing how they are going to continue implementing projects despite of COVID, because there are certain new requirements, health and safety measures which have to be complied with, and this becomes a local regulation. Without that, contractors and consultants cannot work. So we invited some external speakers who will share their experience, and I think will be very useful for all of us, because one thing is we are trying to help countries to fight the impact of COVID for years to come in terms of improving the health infrastructure. But we also have so many projects which have been already approved, were ongoing, but then they were put on hold because of COVID, and now gradually they're resuming their operations. So there are, of course, delays in implementation of those projects, but we are trying to help countries to catch up, but at the same time to make sure that adequate health and safety measures are in place, so that there are no health risks to both contractors, consultants, and actually to the beneficiaries who will be eventually using roads or will be drinking that water. So I would just encourage you to register. The link is here, and I think Mark also has disseminated that link. So that link is open. So the only thing what I would suggest, once you complete the form, you are supposed to receive an email with the link to Zoom platform to which you have to log in. But what I was told by some of the participants, that this email from ADB sometimes goes to the spam mailbox. So please check your spam boxes to make sure that it's not there. So you must have received that. And I look forward to your also continued kind of interest working with ADB. And if you have any questions, I'll be very happy to take those questions. And I'm just looking forward to continuing our collaboration with US firms. Thank you very much. And, back to Mr. Jason.
Thank you, Rustam. Mark, please close us out on the presentation and we'll get to some questions. Thank you. Mark, can you unmute?
Where is it? Okay, hold on.
We hear you.
Oh, you do hear me. Great. Thank you. I still show me on mute. Oh, no, that's the wrong presentation. Sorry. There we go. So I apologize for the that's a good introduction because I am not the best at technology. So I apologize for that and hoping that you all can see my slides. I do want to thank Ambassador I really appreciated the intro. I've been doing this now for about 30 years, and I've had worked in 3 cabinet level agencies, and this is my 6th overseas assignment here in Manila. Over that career, I've learned Russian, Arabic, and I'm now studying Tagalog. But of all the languages that I've had the opportunity to learn, the number one that's helping me most in my job is bureaucraties. And that's the terminology that we in the federal government like to use. Over the past 2 days, you've heard from a litany of U.S. government agencies that all provide a role in helping U.S. companies do business overseas. My job is with the U.S. Commercial Service and that of the U.S. International Trade Administration, U.S. Department of Commerce. That actually is the group that helps you plug into that broader network. And so we have a strong group of people all around the world. But my main job is to try to help you. You've had the chance to hear from both Paul and Rustam about the Asian Development Bank. And with 3,600 employees, learning about the Asian Development Bank is often compared to drinking from a fire hose, in that there is just so much that needs to be understood when dealing with the $30 billion in investment in the big focus that I have is understanding the structures, drives, and motivations of the host governments that ADB works with as well. And that's something that ADB does very well. Trying to keep up just a little bit about the Asian Development Bank. Developed in the 1960s at a very tumultuous time, has always been initially focused a lot on rural development and food production. But over the decades, in its 50 years of existence, ADB has evolved into something amazing and really is one of the best organizations today. And one of the things that I like to say is there is no other organization that I know of that really epitomizes the Indo-Pacific region. It's called the Asian Development Bank, but looking at its maps, you'll see that it covers everywhere from India all the way to the west coast of the United States. It's a very impressive organization. One of the things that I wanted to emphasize is over the years, it's evolved into dealing with so many other issues. And all this is available on the ADB is one of the best I've seen out there in understand and find the information you need on a project tender or effort that they're doing. As you can see, there's many priorities that they get into at the bank. And this is the primary ones for the ADB strategy. And almost everything that ADB does is going to incorporate actual physical points of all these documents and all these focuses to try to make sure that they have addressed them in doing the projects that they do across the region. Each year, as Ambassador Chung said, billions of dollars every year, 68 member countries, and about 50 of them are borrowing member countries. Ambassador Chung is the U.S. Executive Director to the Asian Development Bank, and he is one of 12 board of directors that vote on the day-to-day operations of the bank. He has two advisors, Jacob Henderson and Colin Huerta, who I also wanted to mention. Over 100 citizens like Paul are employed at the Asian Development Bank as well. And so with the over 3,000 officers and staff, we have a great resource that I want to make sure that the international audience that is with us today and those U.S. companies that stayed up late for us are making sure that they avail themselves of. And that's the job that I do and my colleague Michael does here at the liaison office to the bank. My role is actually required by Congress. It was a document, the International Development and Finance Act. And so I am the 10th liaison to the bank. Now we're getting into the nitty gritty of what the bank is. We'll be expecting everybody to memorize this because there will be a test at the end of my presentation. Just kidding. This shows you a little bit about the bank. It again available on the ADB website should you want. Chart. This one shows you the way the bank is structured, and it will help you understand where Rustam, where Paul, and where Ambassador Chung are within the overall structure. There's a board of governors, Secretary Mnuchin and Undersecretary Kratch, who have both participated in the IPBF earlier in the days, are the board of governors. Then we have the executive level, which includes President Asakawa, who is himself just came on in the beginning of January. So he has faced a very tumultuous welcome to the Asian Development Bank. Now down below him, you see the executive director, which again is Ambassador Chung, and then the departments. And that is really where I focus the majority of my time and Michael's time and efforts in understanding the departments and the true experts, of which Rustam and Paul represent some. This just gives you a little bit of exposure of how the bank is operating. Looking at this map, you can see all of the Indo-Pacific, and that is the footprint that ADB operates in. Paul had mentioned NUI in a couple of occasions, which is the newest member of the Living Bank, in that NUI joined in just last year in 2019. And if you look down in here between Samoa and Tonga, there she is, NUI. So it gives you a little bit of a perspective of how the bank continues to develop. Now, getting a little bit into my role again, the U.S. Commercial Service, as I mentioned, these liaisons are required by Congress, and we report to the U.S. Advocacy Center, which is based out of the Commerce Department in Washington, D.C. I did have the opportunity to work. And it was a great opportunity to learn a little bit more about those inner workings. The 5 banks that we represent are listed here on the slides: the Asian Development Bank, the African Development Bank, the European Bank, the Inter-American Bank, and of course the World Bank Group. One of the things that I really want to emphasize is this presentation with the Indo-Pacific Business Forum is part of our strategy to try to make sure that people in the United States and abroad are aware of the roles that the Asian Development Bank has in developing the Indo-Pacific region, and also wanting to show what we're trying to do, working with the U.S. Executive Director's Office and Ambassador Chung, to do more outreach and find more companies to be involved in what is $30 billion in investments every year. We work with a variety of ADB contacts and collaborate with the U.S. Executive Director's Office when U.S. companies are involved in actual ADB projects. We also focus on that greater involvement in there's your bureaucracies, TPCC agencies, which is the Trade Promotion Coordinating Committees. And so those are not the federal agencies that you see at the bottom of the Indo-Pacific logo and all the different organizations that play one role or another in helping U.S. companies across the region. That's another one of my jobs, and the jobs of my domestic offices across the United States, as well as in embassies across the world, is to help you plug into that broader network. We also work to identify projects, and we're working very hard with other local partners in the countries that ADB serves to help partner with U.S. companies. So with this at the end, I just wanted to give you a little bit of showing what the liaisons are. I want to really encourage everyone to reach out to us, because one of my jobs is to make sure that we're coordinating with the companies that need our help. Ambassador Chung and his team are always ready to join on us on a call. So we're developing a regular series. I was on a webinar yesterday with the Chamber of Commerce in Hong Kong. We'll be constantly doing these throughout the year. In fact, just this morning, I woke the day with some good news that our organization was recognized with the second highest award that the Commerce Department gives, a silver medal for the work that we did with the Asian Development Bank in January of 2020, where we brought AD Bank officials to the United States, Washington, D.C. We are fully have how that all works out. With that, I just really want to emphasize, make sure to use us, make sure to reach out to us. Ambassador Chung is a wonderful representative for us at the bank, and I want to make sure that we get the best use of our resources here. So I welcome any questions that the panel has today. And that's it, Ambassador Chung.
Thanks, Mark. So we had a couple questions coming through the chat box. I'm going to try to combine a couple of them. Rustam, you spoke about you're the procurement expert at ADB. Can you explain or just give a little bit more information on how a company can find out about procurement and contracting opportunities, and find out more about proposals, bids, and best ways for companies to apply to know about these procurement opportunities and bid on these procurement opportunities?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chung. I think, this is, there are many different ways on how to find business opportunities. But I think the very first one, the easiest way, is to look at the ADB website. It's very user-friendly now. We are continuously enhancing that, and we have so many filters now, so that it's quite relatively easy to find opportunities by countries, by sectors, by types of assignments, whether it is for firms or for individuals. Of course, those who are interested will have to spend a bit of time to familiarize with our website. But on the main page, you have to go to Business Center, and then it will bring to next page, which will show information or relevant guidance materials for contractors, for consultants, for suppliers, other organizations. And actually, sorry to repeat again, today's virtual presentation, which we will have at 4 p.m., we will have one session actually covering that. We will describe what enhancements we have made to our website, and we will also show how to look for opportunities related to normal operations, but also COVID related. We have introduced a filter. If you type a keyword COVID in the search box, it will show all projects with the COVID elements, whether it's health related or supply of equipment. And one also advice, if you are a consulting firm, but you have never done business with ADB, I would request you to register on ADB's consultant management. It may take maybe 10-15 minutes to put your credentials there, but the most importantly, there will be contact details from your organization, and you will receive weekly notification of all opportunities available in the consulting. Unfortunately, for contractors, we do not provide this kind of automated information because we do not register contractors. The contractors sign contracts with the executing agencies, not with ADB. But for consulting firms, I think this is the first step. And if you have any other kind of very specific questions, you can reach out to me and I will provide you further guidance. Thank you.
Thanks, Rustam. Thank you very much. So I'm going to try to go through a couple of questions that I have, and then we can combine a couple more from the chat function. So Paul, Rustam, and Mark. Paul and Rustam, you guys explained a little bit about the challenges doing work in the Pacific to small and medium-sized companies. What advice can you offer U.S. firms? This is all for three of you, and I'll go in order. Looking to do what advice can you offer firms who want to do business in the Pacific? How to get involved, and how to what type of engagement would you ask them to consider as they look to contribute to these economies? So, with that, why don't we start with Paul?
Thanks, Jason. I think one thing I'd say about is to think carefully about what country or what sector countries would like, or companies would like to engage in, and recognize that, like doing business with any public sector entity, the U.S. government included, it requires a bit of a commitment, right? I mean, we have a unique set of procurement requirements. The countries all have a unique country context. I think there are tremendous opportunities there, but there has to be a commitment from people who are interested. It's not a quick win, quick in and out for some easy business. So I would say think carefully about what sector or what country companies want to get in. And then on that note, I'll just indicate that at least three of the countries in the North Pacific, I mentioned Palau, Marshall Islands, and Federated States of Micronesia, share a lot of characteristics with the United States. So they use the U.S. dollar. English is the working language across the Pacific, but in the North Pacific they use the U.S. dollar, and they have U.S. standards, building construction standards, things like that. And so there's a familiarity in those countries. The majority of the Southern Pacific countries are aligned kind of culturally or technically with the South Pacific, with Australia and New Zealand. So I think you get familiar with the country context and the sector, and then be prepared for a bit of an effort for medium-term engagement. I'll turn it over to my colleagues.
Thanks, Paul. Rustam, if I can get you to speak on this for about 60 to 90 seconds.
Yeah, thank you. I fully agree with Paul. And I think one useful piece of information for all consultants to familiarize with the country's portfolio and the future pipeline is country partnership strategies and country operational business plans, which are available on ADB website, just to read and see in which sectors ADB is going to provide assistance, and then decide which sectors and countries you want to focus. But I also wanted to emphasize that there are two types of consulting opportunities. One are financed by ADB, where ADB signs contracts, and another is where the borrowers, they recruit consultants. As I said, for ADB financed CMS registration will allow you to receive notifications. For government, for projects with the borrowers, then of course there is a need a bit of more work, more homework to see what kind of opportunities are there, because not all of them are published on our website. But one useful tip I would like to also give, on our website we publish list of shortlisted consultants when the shortlisting is done. That already indicates that these companies are strong. but also we publish a list of contracts awarded to consulting firms. So that also indicates those who have very strong potential and maybe you would be willing to associate with them. Because what we see lately, the consulting industry, it's not just one firm from one country is competing with another. Firms are basically competing with
Rustam, we
association.
have 5 minutes left, so I want to get to two more questions. Thank you. Mark, we got a question in. You referenced 30 billion in available opportunities. What are the top industries or project focus? I guess Paul and Rustam, you guys can answer that one as well about the 30 billion in available opportunities. What are the top industries or project focus? And for ADB projects in the Pacific, shortlisted firms winners are usually Australian and New Zealand firms. Is there any efforts being made to level the playing field for bidders from other countries? So, Mark, why don't you take the first one, and then we can see if Rustam and you can answer the second one. So,
sure. Yeah, I mean, as we look down the list, because every project that ADB does has that ADB funding goes to energy, number 2, urban development, water is a combined one for number 3. There's and really the list goes down to dozens that are actually funded by ADB. So that's building back to the last question, my comment about drinking from a fire hose. One of the biggest challenges of ADB is its complexity and the diversity that it does. So focusing your efforts and understanding what, rather like Paul mentioned, thinking precise, looking at what countries you want to be involved in is probably the easiest way to get started. Thank you.
All right. Rustam, do you want to have any comments about how firms can apply and be part of the shortlisting process and so on and so forth? What would you do to encourage them to be active participants, and how would you let them know that they can be shortlisted and so on and so forth?
I think one advice would be that, of course, in the request for expression of interest, there is that information which we expect to see from the firms in terms of past experience. If firms do not have all the required experience, maybe it's better to associate with some other firms who have that experience. Because what I wanted to emphasize, nowadays, it's not just one firm from one country is competing with another consulting firm from another country. Even if the headquarters are in the US, they're trying to use their maybe branch offices in Singapore or in Hong Kong or somewhere else to cut the costs. And also because certain countries will always have competitive advantage because of closeliness to the project sites. So their travel costs will be less. So other countries who are more remote, they're firms, but they're trying basically to associate with the countries who can provide inputs from a closer location. And also a very important, I think, tip would be that because of COVID, a lot of consulting activities will be done remotely, like research studies, so that probably the geographical location will not have a very big impact, at least in those areas where work can be done remotely. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Rustam. So we have about a minute and a half left. So I want to close. I want to thank our panelists, Paul, Rustam, and Mark, for your participation. I want to thank those of you who are attending. As we close, I want to encourage all of you to visit the Indo-Pacific Business Forum official website at Indo-PacificBusinessForum.com for further information and rebroadcasts of all the sessions that took place over the past couple of days. With that, I thank you very much for your attendance. And again, if you need any assistance at working with ADB, please feel free to contact Mark, Mike, and my office. Thank you so much.